Hey everyone. I'm just going to go through the answers to the Industrial Revolution unit review. I might go kind of quickly through the answers. So at any time, if you need to kind of pause and maybe take a look at your answers to check yours or maybe fill some in, you have that option. Okay, number one, when did the Industrial Revolution begin? It began around 1750, 1760. Uh, it's kind of blurry on the actual start, so just know it was around that time. Two, where did the Industrial Revolution begin? The two major countries were England and Scotland, and only eventually did it get to the United States. What were the two main sources of power during the Industrial Revolution? Uh, we have water power here, and you can see water running through to turn this wheel, which is going to store electricity to run the machines. And then we have steam power, which is actually coal power. So the heating up of coal produced steam. Um, I can't go into the process, but just know that coal is the driving force here. For what advantage did Britain have over other countries? Well, coal was very easy to get because there was a lot of it, and this made the price of coal cheaper. And if you've ever played Minecraft, coal is kind of the first source of energy that's used in that game too. So it's based off real life. What was life like before the Industrial Revolution? Most people were farmer. Typically, you married within your own communities. We talked about that, and you were expected to help with the family farm. And actually, life was pretty difficult. Okay, so the next questions are about the four cities assignments, and I'm just going to go through each of them. Glasgow was located in Scotland. Uh, transportation tech, transportation technology was improved. Trains, boats, and even the invention of tires made transportation easier. And although the pollution was increasing, people did not go hungry because farming technologies were also increasing. Manchester was located in England. It was known as Cottonopolis. The population increased by at least 10 times, and this meant a rapid expansion of housing and living areas. The addition of factories and people increased the pollution of the area. New Lanark was also located in Scotland. This city was revolutionized by the industrialist Robert Owen, which we're going to look at for question 12 here. And although people in this city experienced better living and work conditions, they also experienced less freedom. So there's kind of a trade off there. Number seven, what made New Lanark different from other industrial cities? So this is kind of piggybacking on the last one that we did. People would still be paid in the factories even when production was halted. This was a new concept, paying people to do work that they weren't actually doing. And this came from there was kind of a trade dispute between New Lanark and the United States, and so production stopped, but people were still being paid. And then also the factory, the money that was made from the factories was going into schooling. What was one of the first major industrial cities in the US? Lowell, Massachusetts. Nine, describe how this American city from number eight powered its factories. So in the four cities assignment, you learned that a specific waterfall, the falling of the water is what was used to store electricity. But they also built an extensive canal system, which worked its way throughout the city and powered the factories. 10, where were early industrial revolution cities developed and why? You'll notice that all of the cities that we've learned about are located near water. 11, what was the first product to be mass produced during the Industrial Revolution? We've talked about this one a lot. So textiles and cloth was the main product initially. 12, who was Robert Owen? You learned about this guy in the Four Cities assignment. Robert Owen was an industrialist who took children out of factories and developed schooling. He knew that people would need to be educated to work in the factories. So Robert Owen is kind of controversial. He was very ahead of his time, like 100 years before traditional schooling started to take place. So how do you view that? Was Robert Owen a good guy looking out for people by educating them, or was he just training people so that he could make more money? Who was Adam Smith, number 13? Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and if that's all you know about him, that is enough. He's known as the grandfather of capitalism, and we read one of his primary sources in which he listed three reasons for why urbanization factories were a good thing. So really all you need to know about Adam Smith was that he wrote The Wealth of Nations, and that kind of formed capitalism. Who was James Hargreaves? James Hargreaves invented the spinning jenny, which was a machine that turned wool into yarn. And I believe this is the last person here. Who was Michael Sadler, and what were his thoughts on the Industrial Revolution? Michael Sadler wrote the Sadler Report. Remember, he was interviewing people about child labor. This interview exposed the corruption of the Industrial Revolution, child labor, working on Sundays, working after midnight, beating of employees, lack of food, etc. So he made the Industrial Revolution look like a terrible thing. Who were the Luddites? Luddites were people who believed that new technology was bad. They broke into factories and broke the machinery. They based their name off an imaginary leader named Ned Ludd. Okay, most of this information was either from the Four Cities assignment that we went over so far, or it was from the first semester. You'll notice that the next half of these questions here are things that we learned much more recently and should be a little bit easier for you. What is a primary source? Something that was written at the time of an event. Think of newspaper clippings, letters, journals, etc. What is a secondary source? A secondary source is something that was written much after an event. So if you think of primary, something that happened in the prime of the event, then a secondary source came second or later, and it's something that was written much after an event. And you should think of textbooks, articles, documentaries, etc. What is oral history? It's similar to an interview. Oral history is focused on the individual with the objective of being used by historians. Identify two things an oral historian can do to archive an oral history and prepare it for the future. Pretty straightforward. Two things are to make sure that it's high quality and that it's properly stored or organized. What is historical fiction? We break down these two words. It's a make-believe story about the past. So historical being in the past, fiction being not true. However, there are some true things that take place in historical fiction. It's usually the time period, the setting, and the types of events are all things that are pretty real. What is usually fiction? Usually the characters are made up, and that is to either entertain the reader and to teach them about the past. Where and when is Liddy a work of historical fiction set? This took place in the United States, so it took place in Lowell, Massachusetts in the 1830s. So just knowing that it took place in the US in Lowell is good enough. 25, in the novel Liddy, what is Liddy's living arrangement? She lived in a boarding house. 26, if artists, painters, illustrators, photographers want to show a negative aspect of the Industrial Revolution, what is one detail they might include? They might have smog in the picture, pollution, unhappy people, and children working in factories. 27, if artists, painters, illustrators, photographers want to show a positive aspect of the Industrial Revolution, what is one detail that they might include? So they might have some productivity, people looking happy, bustling cities, and a focus on technology. 28, what problems did cities of the Industrial Revolution have? Pollution, dangerous work environments. 29, how did transportation change with the Industrial Revolution and why? So the development of trains, coal-powered ships, and eventually automobiles. And why is because they needed something to move materials back and forth from the factories. So everything is kind of based upon these factories and industrializing. 30, fewer people farmed during the Industrial Revolution than in the centuries before the Industrial Revolution. But England and Scotland and other industrializing countries did not run out of food. Why not? Because although people were leaving the farms to go work in the city, and we learned that this was called urbanization, farm technology was also increasing. So we were coming up with new machines that were helping us with our farming and producing food. 31, coal miners did not work in factories, but you could say that their jobs were created by the Industrial Revolution. Explain. So coal was a major source of power for the factories, and we used the burning of coal to produce steam. This meant that we needed more coal. So if we need more coal, we need more people mining coal, and that was creating coal mining jobs. Last question on our review sheet. 32, textiles can be made from many raw materials. Name two most common that we have studied in this unit, and that would be wool and cotton.